This is a presentation on the proposed new housing development at Kippielaw. The site was promoted as one of the sites included in the 16,500 houses emerging from Midlothian Council's Call for Ideas exercise for the next Midlothian Local Development Plan, MLDP2. The map shows the location of the Kippielaw site at the north end of East Houses Road. This aerial photograph shows the original site proposed in 2013 for the current local development plan. The site was eventually rejected by Midlothian Council following a long campaign by the Save Kippielaw organisation, who submitted over 1,300 individual objections to the development. This time round, the developer is no longer pretending that all they want is a small development. As you can see, the site is now much larger and extends to both sides of East Houses Road. On one side of the road, it consumes the triangle field which separates Kippielaw from East Houses. On the other side of the road, it fills in all the fields between East Houses and Woodburn. As you can see from this wider map, the location of the Kippielaw site and several other proposed sites at North Mayfield, including the Conifer Road site and 2 sites at Lawfield Farm, the developer's strategy is to continue expansion northwards until the new housing merges with White Hill. The Kippielaw site was included in the draft plan last time with a stated capacity of 60 to 70 houses, which was a cynical attempt by the developer to avoid the issue of coalescence in what was clearly a Trojan horse scheme designed to gain a foothold in Kippielaw Farm in order to build a much larger housing development in phases, leading to the eventual destruction of all of the countryside between Dalkeith and White Hill. This time, the same strategy is also being employed in North Mayfield at Lawfield Farm in a twin attack. This site has a long history of development proposals. Our community has been under threat of new housing development on at least 4 previous occasions. In 2004, the site was opposed by Mayfield and East Houses Community Council and was eventually rejected by councillors, mainly on the grounds of coalescence. In the last local plan, the site was opposed by the wider community, and following a long campaign, the site was rejected by councillors on the many grounds which we will demonstrate in this presentation. In 2019, Midlothian Council proposed building a new primary school on the site as part of a major new housing development. The plans for the school were subsequently dropped, and the housing development was again not supported by councillors. Now the site is back on the agenda with yet another proposal for housing in the emerging local plan MLDP2. In a nutshell, here is the latest proposal. Cala Homes want to build between 300 and 500 new houses on the site. These would be a mix of 75% full market price private houses for sale and 25% social housing in line with the usual developer contribution. This would produce around 1,250 new residents, of which 300 would be school children. The development would consume 50 acres of productive arable farmland. Such development does not represent growth for Midlothian. As claimed by some, it is the unnecessary and willful destruction of our countryside. To understand why these developers are so keen to build at Kippielaw, we need to examine the economics of private house building. As pure farmland, the value to the landowner is no more than £10,000 per acre, so this site is worth £500,000 on the open market. If the land gets allocated for housing in the local plan, and a subsequent planning application is approved, then the value of the land increases to around 1/3 of the value of the houses being built. In this case, the land alone becomes worth around £53 million before expenses such as developer contributions. This leaves a house builder profit of a further £53 million after construction costs. For a site that the planning department had not even shortlisted for development, this is a potential gift of over £100 million to the developer and landowner. The remaining stages in the MLDP2 process between now and the adoption of the final plan are set out here. At the planning committee held on the 26th of June, it was agreed to add Kippielaw to the shortlist of sites at the request of Councillor Mackenzie. Work is underway within the planning department to assess all the sites on the shortlist using the recently created site selection methodology. Once this work is complete, a further workshop will be held with planners and councillors to pick the sites to be allocated in MLDP2. Sufficient sites need to be allocated to meet the predicted shortfall of 1,660 houses against the Scottish Government's target for Midlothian. At that workshop, councillors will also identify areas within the shortlist in which they would like to see development beyond the 10 years covered by MLDP2. There is an opportunity at this workshop for Kippielaw to be left unallocated and not identified for long-term development if councillors wish. The next stage is publication of the proposed plan for public consultation over the period November to January next year. If Kippielaw appears in the proposed plan, then this is the period where we have an opportunity to make representations to the Council. Such representations will be considered by the Council next year between February and September. Again, there is an opportunity for councillors to remove Kippielaw if they wish. The final plan will then be sent to the Scottish Government ministers for examination in October next year. Part of their examination will be to take a view on unresolved representations, and they will produce a report with their own recommendations. The final plan will be adopted by Midlothian Council in May 2027. Mayfield and East Houses Community Council has a number of reasons for objecting to the proposed Kippielaw site. We will look at these under three headings. Firstly, our understanding of what the local plan means to us. Then look at whether we really need to continue building on greenfield land. And finally examine the reasons why Kippielaw is such a bad choice of site. The Local Development Plan is much more than a document containing maps and policies. It should represent the aspirations of our local communities and form a contract between the Council and the communities it serves. This time round, the plan is being prepared from the ground up and not imposed as a top-down exercise. The Planning Department have gathered the views of local communities through the local place plan process. Community councils have presented their community's aspirations for their future. The Planning Department have listened and prepared a short list of sites which reflects the needs of each community. For our community, like many others, we need more council housing, not more expensive private houses which local people can't afford to buy. And we have land available without sacrificing swathes of farmland. If these aspirations do not follow through to the development plan, then the plan loses all credibility. If our community cannot see their opinions being taken into account by our elected representatives, then all trust is lost in the planning process and the contract is broken. Midlothian has been obligated by the Scottish Government to find land for a further 1,660 new houses in MLDP2. With over 5,000 families on the council house waiting list, we should be using this as an opportunity to build 1,660 council houses. This table demonstrates that the 1,660 can be met without shortlisting any more new greenfield sites such as Kippielaw. In fact, it can be met from brownfield sites, safeguarded sites from the current local plan, and the release of previously constrained sites. Mayfield and Easthouses have agreed to accept 5 of these shortlisted sites, all of which will produce council houses and make a contribution of 206 houses to the shortfall. These sites will benefit local people. Here is the list of our objections to the inclusion of Kippielaw on the shortlist. We will now go through this extensive list and examine in more detail each reason for objection. The Kippielaw site is in the countryside and is a greenfield site. These are 2 compelling facts which render the site inappropriate for a new housing development. The aerial photograph shows exactly why it would be contrary to planning policy to make such an unnecessary sacrifice of a finite resource in our countryside. In fact, the planning department regard Kippielaw steading as a prime example of what development in the countryside should look like, as evidenced by their photograph demonstrating its importance in the 2008 local plan. Moreover, their rigorous conditions for building in the countryside have been applied to the planning consent granted in June 2013 for Kippielaw Hatchery. In this case, the developer is being required to build a replica steading using natural stone walls, slate roof, acoustic double glazing and timber windows so that it would be in keeping with Kippielaw steading and comply with the countryside planning policies. How inappropriate to then fill in the fields between these 2 steadings with what would inevitably be a modern looking housing scheme. The Kippielaw site is in the centre of an area of prime agricultural land. Once this land is sacrificed for housing, the loss is permanent. According to the James Hutton Institute, Kippielaw Farm is classified as Category 3.1, prime being categories 1 to 3.1. Currently, these fields are being actively farmed for crops. The land capability map clearly demonstrates this fact. Moreover, the map also highlights the potential coalescence of the built-up areas shown in red. We are one step away from a housing belt surrounding the whole of this side of Dalkeith. Scottish planning policy presumes against the development of prime quality agricultural land in all but the most exceptional of circumstances. According to the planning department site selection methodology, this site totally fails the first step of the process, which states that areas of prime agricultural land should be completely excluded from development. The Kippielaw site is the only remaining physical separation of our community from Dalkeith. If that separation is removed by house building, our communities coalesce into an expanded city of Dalkeith. Mayfield and Easthouses simply becomes a district of Dalkeith. At that point, we lose our separate identities. Without our local communities, we have no need for community councils. We may as well just have one big Midlothian community council, or even just a Midlothian council. Events such as gala days would be pointless. We may as well just have a float for each district in a combined Dalkeith Gala Day parade. This creeping urban sprawl will create one enormous housing estate from the centre of Dalkeith to the top of Mayfield. The consequences of coalescence by stealth will be the permanent loss of the individual community identities, along with the loss of our treasured green space. The Gladman photograph from the 2019 attack shows their intention to build up to White Hill and demonstrates the potential urban sprawl which would be created if our communities were joined up. The latest planning policies are laid out in the National Planning Framework 4 document produced by the Scottish Government. Local policies are currently being developed by Midlothian Council as part of the proposed MLDP2. Once we have details of these, a review of their application to the Kippielaw site will be carried out. The current local plan is protected by numerous policies, some of which are shown here. The Kippielaw site lies within a belt of very attractive and valued countryside between Easthouses and Dalkeith. It is marked visually by the former colliery airshaft, now a listed monument. Following cessation of mining on the site in the late 19th century, the land has been returned to farming and to nature. As the site is approached from any angle, the chimney of the former threshing mill of Kippielaw Farm, now incorporated in the Kippielaw Steading housing complex, becomes the dominant visual feature. While the fields are still in productive arable use today, both the paths around and through them and the visual amenity are much enjoyed by the people from the wider surrounding area. The children from Lawfield Primary School use this land as a nature trail for school projects. Local residents can escape from the traffic on Easthouses Road to safely walk their dogs and enjoy the increasingly rare open space. This is reflected in the fact that Mayfield and Easthouses neighbourhood plan uses a photograph of the former colliery airshaft to contrast with the predominantly urban images of Mayfield and Easthouses themselves. Midlothian Council's decision in 2002 to grant planning permission for the conversion of Kippielaw steadings to housing was taken in part to safeguard these buildings. Safeguarding the special character of the buildings and their setting was a key feature of the permission, and this could not be guaranteed if housing development was permitted in the vicinity. A high-pressure gas pipeline runs through the middle of the site, placing residents of any future housing development at unacceptable levels of risk in the event of a pipe fracture. The pipeline was constructed in 1964 and is buried at a depth of 1.2 metres below ground level. It is a 273mm diameter steel pipe operating at a pressure in excess of 10 bar. This is a major transmission pipeline running between Pathhead and Fairmile Head. Due to its age, there are no records of X-rays for the welded joints. Health and Safety Executive has specified a blast zone of 16 metres either side of the pipeline, which cannot be built upon. This 32-metre corridor bisects the site and renders it totally inappropriate for a housing development. Midlothian Planning Department have made the following comments in answer to a Freedom of Information request. The Council will have to come to a judgment on the significance of losing approximately 36% of the site and the implications for site effectiveness and deliverability. The pipeline bisects the site and tends to sterilise areas that one would ordinarily expect to build upon. The photograph shows just how inappropriate the proposal to put housing in the site is. The impact of new housing developments on infrastructure and the full range of council services is too big an issue to discuss here. Instead, we shall examine two topics which cause great concern to our communities. The first is education. Mayfield and Easthouses benefits from having a fantastic new school estate, including Lawfield, Easthouses, and the forthcoming Mayfield campus, as well as a brand new high school at New Battle campus. Why would we want to fill up the remaining capacity at these schools by building more unnecessary private housing estates which simply import pupils from out with Midlothian? We are not in the business of helping out the house builders. We are in the business of ensuring that our children do not suffer from an overstretched education system. Turning now to our overstretched GP practices, I want to share with you the views of Midlothian Health and Social Care Partnership, including the views of our GPs at Newbattle Health Centre. In a joint letter to the Council, they say that they will struggle to cope with the growth in population. Kippielaw would add 1,250 new patients to Newbattle Health Centre. In both these cases, education and healthcare, new council houses do not put pressure on services because the people on the council house waiting list are already on the school roll and on the GP list. The proposed new access roads for both parts of the Kippielaw site, as previously submitted by the developer, would create yet another 2 junctions on East Houses Road. Over the last 12 years, since the previous proposal was submitted, East Houses Road has become much busier due to a number of factors, including new housing development in the surrounding area. With the opening of the Northern Bypass and the new housing developments at Wester Cowden and Dalkeith Heights, Salters Road running round to the Lauder Road is now a busy commuter route to East Houses and Mayfield. This is in addition to the normal Dalkeith traffic passing along East Houses Road. Local residents have also expressed concern about traffic speed on East Houses Road, which is supposed to be restricted to 30 miles an hour. Anyone trying to turn off East Houses Road into any of the housing developments or trying to join East Houses Road will know the dangers involved. The local community do not want even more traffic on an already very busy commuter artery. It is worth noting that the fact that East Houses Road is a bus route will be of little concern to the residents of Kippielaw houses, who are likely to own at least 2 cars per household. The lands at Kippielaw Farm, including the triangle field separating Kippielaw Housing Estate from East Houses, are a generally recognised wildlife corridor of significant importance. This corridor links the strategic green space of Newbattle and the South Esk River Valley to the open countryside via Kippielaw to Whitehill and beyond. If this corridor were to be destroyed by infilling the green space between Woodburn and East Houses, then the impact on our wildlife would be catastrophic. The wildlife corridor through Kippielaw Farm is essential to sustain a viable route for various species to travel. Examples include the many deer and badgers which live and pass through Kippielaw. As evidence of this, we would refer you to a report prepared by Dr. Christopher Sides, a recognised expert authority on badgers, who represents the Midlothian area for Scottish badgers. The current local plan refers to the need to improve biodiversity and amenity, improve habitat networks, to counter fragmentation and assist species migration. The technical assessment of sites report from the current local plan states there are species that have protections under law, for example bats, badgers, etc., which can extend to their habitats. Furthermore, there are wildlife corridors, such as ancient and gorge woodlands, which provide important links between habitats and ensure their long-term viability by providing a wider gene pool to draw upon. Such areas may or may not be protected by designations, but either way, the Council has the responsibility to ensure that they are not adversely harmed by development. The MLDP environmental report refers to the need to avoid causing significant adverse effects on species, habitats, wildlife corridors, of nature conservation importance. This map highlights clearly why development of the Kippielaw site would close and destroy the remaining wildlife access route by joining up the built-up areas shown in red. According to the Coal Authority, the Kippielaw site is in a zone of influence from previous coal mining operations. There are workings in 5 seams of coal at shallow to 330 metres depth, last worked in 1900. Within or adjacent to the site there are several separate mine entries. The approximate position of some of these are shown on the map. As far as the mine shafts are concerned, one was infilled in 1967 to an unknown specification, and there are no treatment details available for the other 2. As far as the underground workings are concerned, there are no location details available. However, the local area has been worked in several different time periods by the monks at Newbattle Abbey hundreds of years ago, up to late Victorian times when Shaw's Colliery was operational. The whole area to the east of Kippielaw Farmhouse is prone to subsidence and ground collapse. The extent of the work involved in stabilising the ground, even if it can be achieved, renders the site totally inappropriate for new housing. Our local place plan is opposed to further large-scale housing developments. We're already facing a 28% increase in the population of Mayfield and East Houses due to committed development. None of these developments will bring new amenities or infrastructure or employment. We are becoming a dormitory for commuters from Edinburgh who spend their money in Edinburgh, do their shopping in Edinburgh, spend their leisure time in Edinburgh. They jam up our roads, fill our doctors' surgeries, and want their children educated by Midlothian Council. We share the views of the Midlothian Federation of Community Councils when they say all but one community council are of the view that they don't want any more major new sites allocated or safeguarded for further housing development beyond those already included in the current adopted local plan. Mayfield and East Houses comprise 8% of Midlothian's population and 1.6% of Midlothian's land area. Mayfield and East Houses Community Council agreed to accept 12.4% of the housing shortfall, amounting to a contribution of 206 houses. Including the possible long-term sites, which we would consider, that amounts to 40% of sites promoted in our area out of the 16,500 promoted for Midlothian. This is even more than the 27% which the Planning Department identified for the original shortlist of 4,457 houses. We supported the 206 new houses because the vast majority of them will be council houses. This table shows precisely how unfair it would be to expect Mayfield and East Houses to take a further 500 houses on top of the 206 we have already accepted. Are we really expected to take 706 houses out of the Midlothian shortfall of 1,660? The Kippielaw site has been promoted by the developer as having an estimated capacity of 300 houses. We believe this is an underestimate. This practice is used to deceive communities into believing that sites will be much smaller and therefore more palatable. North Mayfield was estimated at 65 units in the last local plan, but then the planning application was made for 199 units. The true capacity of Kippielaw, after cramming by the developer, is likely to be around 500 houses. We don't need 500 more Cala houses. We need Council houses. Developer contributions were discussed at the June Planning Committee meeting, where it was made clear that developers will only be required to make contributions to offset any adverse impact caused by their development. So if Easthouse's primary school and New Battle High School have spare capacity, then the developer will make no developer contributions whatsoever towards our schools. This deprives the council of around £15 million of capital funds and puts that money back in the pocket of the developer. Why would the council do this to itself? The Scottish Government requires Midlothian Council to identify areas for development beyond 10 years. So why does that matter when MLDP2 only covers the next 10 years, from 2027 to 2037? It matters because developers will choke the house building programme in order to bring forward these long-term sites if they believe them to be more profitable. NPF 4 will help them to do just that. So once a site is identified in the MLDP2 as an area for long-term development, it may as well just be allocated for short-term development. Trying to separate these two time periods is futile and naive. The local residents in the neighbouring communities of Easthouses, Mayfield, Kippielaw, Woodburn and Whitehill previously submitted to the council more than 1,300 signed individual and pro forma letters of objection to the Kippielaw site being allocated for new housing. Copies of these letters were also sent to our local MP, MSP and councillors for the local area. The local residents received the support of Mayfield and Easthouses Community Council as well as neighbouring community councils. Letters of objection were submitted by our MP and MSP. There was cross-party support from the Scottish Parliament. In total, the council received 2,100 comments on the whole local plan. 1,300 of these were objections to the Kippielaw site. This time round, if Kippielaw remains in the draft plan, we expect the objections to be much greater for this expanded site and because of the decision by our councillors to disregard the previously expressed views of their electorate. Apart from the developer, the only person promoting Kippielaw for development is one of our own ward councillors. This is his justification given to the recent Planning Committee meeting held on the 26th of June. I was at the seminar and I asked for that site to be included. My thinking is this: there is a lot of discussion within the community council etc. about sites generally. I counted up my figures and they were absolutely not ever in support of 60% of the sites. So when I looked at Mayfield and Easthouses, there is a need for more housing. That's in my inbox every single day. We have a new school in Easthouses. The roles for that school are not generous. These sites would support those kids. We will support that school, but we could add more kids. Those sites would support Easthouses Primary. Now, in terms of the expanding conurbation, we also can't expand that town settlement to the north because of the green belt. To the west, the Lingerwood site is already allocated. There are a couple of sites south at Lawfield Farm, Lawfield East and West at the top of Mayfield. Why I didn't pick those sites for additional is because if we did build those sites, then all the new people would need to drive right through Mayfield. If the elected members choose to increase the numbers, which I think they need to for me, and you are never going to please everybody, for me those sites down at the bottom of the road stops people having to drive up through the town. It's right in the right area for the catchment area for that brand new primary school. In terms of doctors and stuff, I think they could go to Dalkeith. So if we were being really parochial, then that lessens the infrastructure burden on my own ward, but to the detriment of Dalkeith. That was my thinking. That's why I wanted Kippielaw included. On the strength of that reasoning, Councillor Mackenzie got Kippielaw added to the shortlist, from which the 1,660 new houses will be picked and areas identified for long-term development beyond 10 years. We must emphasise that this site was not shortlisted by the Planning Department, and had it not been for Councillor Mackenzie's decision, the site would have been off the table, both as a potential allocated site in MLDP2 and as a potential area for MLDP3 long-term development. To get the site shortlisted must be a surprising bonus for the developer, given that it was not shortlisted by the Planning Department prior to Councillor Mackenzie's intervention. In conclusion, Mayfield and Easthouse's Community Council object in the strongest terms possible to the inclusion of the Kippielaw site in the proposed plan, both for the MLDP2 new housing allocation and also for identification as an area for potential long-term development. What Midlothian desperately needs are 1,660 new council houses. We should not be prioritising large-scale private developments over council house provision for our communities. We respectfully ask that Midlothian Council, and especially our 3 ward councillors, give due consideration to this issue.